I begin with some statistics. There are less than 100,000 Jews in Australia. There are about 800,000 Muslims, about 8 times as many. The population of Israel is 7 million Jews and 2 million Arabs. Jews make up only 0.02% of the world's population, about 15 million people. They've won 22% of Nobel Prizes. And they do just as well in the Olympics with 147 gold prizes. With that statistical background, I've got to say the incidence of violent anti-Semitism in Australia has been increasing over the last 2 decades. This explains a curious, what I found originally curious, that was in the early 2000s, reliance on security guards, which were being introduced to the entrances to synagogues and even kindergartens. But a crisis has arisen recently with successive governments' failure to ensure no immigrant would ever import into Australia some unwanted ancient hatred. They were supposed to drop those at the border. In 1975, following the Lebanese Civil War and representations made by leading Christian Lebanese in Australia, the Fraser government created a so-called Lebanese concession to allow Lebanese Christians to escape from the Christian-Muslim conflict in the Lebanon and come to Australia. Curiously, most of those who came were Muslims from deprived areas. Then, in 2012, the Labor Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, was rolled by her caucus on her wish to maintain Australia's bipartisan policy of not supporting, in the United Nations, the representation of a non-existent Palestinian state in the General Assembly. Remember that the representatives of Palestine were Hamas, the terrorist Hamas, and the hopeless, corrupt government of Hezbollah. According to Daniel Flint in the Sydney Morning Herald at the time, despite a tradition of staunch support for Israel, Labor's already precarious prospects in certain Western Sydney electorates, with a high concentration of people with Middle Eastern backgrounds, was a key factor in the rolling of Prime Minister Gillard. It was, in fact, the dominant factor determining Labor policy. As mentioned previously, the test now for any relevant policy, foreign or domestic, in the Labor caucus or cabinet is, can it be defended on the steps of the Lakemba Mosque? Can it be defended on the steps of the Lakemba Mosque? This was used at the time that Ms. Gillard was overruled by her caucus. Let's make it clear. In other words, any relevant government policy under Labor, state or federal, is based on an estimation of its effect on a hypothetical Muslim vote in the 29 electorates in which the Muslim vote is 5% or more. That policy should be determined so improperly is bad enough. But under the Albanese and Minns government, a new and devastating intensification of anti-Semitism has occurred. The adoption of extreme anti-Semitism has been manifested by both these governments, Albanese's and Minns, in their shocking failure to act against open incitement of violence and even the murder of Jews. This position, the government's position, is often disguised by pretending to condemn equally anti-Semitism and virtually non-existent Islamophobia. Or alternatively, there's some pretense put up that the law can't be applied. The great leaders of the Labour Party, Dr. H.V. Evatt and Bob Hawke, would be equally outraged by this. The phenomenon of tolerating anti-Semitism sadly follows a similar development in the United States through the Democratic Party, which today is a mere shadow of itself under its great leaders in the past, people like JFK. Such ideas are spreading throughout the West, usually beginning with the linguistically and culturally susceptible Anglosphere. We now have the official toleration of anti-Semitism, and it's here in Australia. And that's a disgrace.